Success in GCSE English Language is so much about practice. I've got a brand new OCR paper 2 for you with my model answers and mark scheme. What's not to like? Stay tuned. Yes, Schofield on Shakespeare.
In this video, texts and questions for this new paper will automatically appear at 5-second intervals. You will need to press pause to read these through before writing down your own answers. Toggle back to the extracts to answer the questions properly, but this will be easy to do knowing that each slide will be shown for 5 seconds. Generally, the passages will be divided up into 3 slides so that the font isn't too small to read. Remember that I will show you the mark scheme and my answers after all questions and texts have been shown, but you will get the most out of this video if you have actually attempted to complete the full paper yourself. If you prefer, you can email me at schofieldonshakespeare@gmail.com to obtain a PDF version of the inserts and question paper. Either way, time to get reading.
How did you get on? Produce some wonderful answers. Time now for the mark scheme and my model responses.
So here's the answer for question 1A. Just young is fine, or young friend, or my dear young friend. Nothing longer, please. Time to mark. For question B, one of 3 to choose from, either old or many memories or resulting in bad dreams. Press pause to mark. For question C, quite a few possible answers, and either quotations or paraphrasing is fine. Press pause to mark. For question 2, the shorter language and structure question, the guidance for marking suggests that subject terminology needs to be integrated into the answer, so you can't just hopefully name drop without exploring the effects. A reminder that you need a reasonable balance between language and structure points. Here are some suggested points from the indicative contents. Press pause to read these through and compare to your answer. Does it strike you that any of these quotations are juicier and allow for greater exploration than the ones that you chose?
Time for my model answer for question 2.
This passage builds up tension by initially describing a routine walk home which is subsequently disrupted by a strange encounter. It is clear that the narrator is initially carefree and knows his route home automatically. He mechanically turns a particular way and idly wonders what the Cumberland young ladies would look like. Both these adverbs emphasize that the narrator is not thinking too deeply and that his thoughts are relatively relaxed and carefree. However, tension is built up when this automaticity is disrupted in the final part of the final sentence of the first paragraph. We learn that every drop of blood in his body was brought to a stop by the touch of her hands. The hyperbolic reference to every single drop of his blood being halted suggests that he feels incredibly shocked by being so unexpectedly touched. Structurally, this builds up tension by the sequencing within the sentence. This starts with the narrator feeling relaxed as he strolls along the lonely high road, but this mood is shattered by the reference to every drop of blood in his body being brought to a stop. We need to read further into the sentence to find out what has caused this petrified reaction, and this delayed revelation builds up tension. Further tension is created by the short paragraph for effect in line 7. This describes the scared reaction of the narrator, who turns on the instant with his fingers tightening around the handle of his stick. The present participle tightening confirms both the narrator's sudden unease, but also may imply that he may be gearing himself up to use his stick as a weapon to potentially defend himself from an attack. Meanwhile, the prepositional phrase on the instant builds tension as it shows the instinctive, rapid fear of the narrator. This strange event has caused him to react impulsively in order to identify a possible threat. Structurally, this paragraph delays the revelation about the identity of the toucher. We have only found out about a hand, which further builds up tension as we wonder whether there may be a supernatural influence at play here. It is the middle of the night, after all. Time now to make a judgment call on your response, which you will be better equipped to do having read through my response and looked at the suggested points in the mark scheme. To get into the top band, you need to have detailed insight into both language and structure. Give yourself a mark out of 6 now. For question 3, just double check now that you only reference lines 11 to 40. Remember, you will get no credit for any analysis, however good, of language or structure from another part of the extract. So how does Bram Stoker use language and structure to describe the narrator's feelings? Here are some suggested notes on the mark scheme about the language. Remember that these would need to be developed and explored in detail in order to achieve a high mark. Here, they're just starting points, but press pause to read now the points first on language, then structure,
Time for my model answer on question 3.
In the first paragraph from the extract, the narrator feels trapped, fraught, and claustrophobic in the Count's castle. He writes, "I felt that I was indeed in prison. It is destroying my nerve." Although the narrator is technically a guest, he clearly feels discombobulated by his surroundings and that he is unable to leave. The verb destroying is a strong one, which suggests that he feels his confidence and self-control are being completely eroded, something emphasized by the brevity of the short sentence. Further signs of his fragile mental state are seen in the suggestion that he starts at his own shadow and is full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. The former confirms just how jumpy the narrator has become. He clearly feels that he may be in some kind of danger in the dark castle, hence his fear at the possibility of anyone coming near him. Meanwhile, the latter highlights his lack of control and how his mind has become preoccupied by scenarios which presumably see his life being put at risk. Structurally, the writer uses exclamatory sentences and rhetorical questions to reveal his feelings of despair and fear. He cries out, "God knows that there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place." The wider reference to God intimates the narrator's feelings of solitary powerlessness. With no one to talk to or protect him, he feels the need to call out to a benign, omnipotent power known for opposing the forces of evil and darkness. Meanwhile, in the final paragraph, he asks, "What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it in the semblance of man?" This rhetorical question and the rephrased repetition of what manner of highlights his incredulity at the essence of the creature he saw crawling down the castle walls. He feels terrified and dumbfounded by what he saw because it transcends usual reassuring human boundaries. It is notable that the narrator initially does not feel unsettled by the Count as he first sticks his head out of the window. He was at first interested and somewhat amused. These adjectives indicate commonplace reactions at seeing something unexpected, which doesn't seem threatening or alarming. However, these feelings change to repulsion and terror when the Count starts to crawl down the castle walls. The first noun is particularly interesting as it suggests that he doesn't just feel fear, but inwardly sickened by the sight of someone apparently human acting in a way which suggests a closer kinship to some kind of winged creature. He feels disbelief at this sight, something emphasized by the simple, short sentence for effect. At first, I could not believe my eyes. After realizing that it was no delusion, the final sentence of the extract is fragmented and dotted by hyphens and ellipses to show his feelings of distress and disorientation. I'm in fear, in awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I'm encompassed about with terrors that I dare not think of. The hyphens show his stuttering terror, something confirmed by the repetition of the noun fear. Meanwhile, the phrasal verb encompassed about suggests that the narrator feels buffeted and hemmed in by the range of different terrors racing around in his mind. Finally, the ellipses at the end of the sentence highlight the continuous, ongoing nature of his feelings of terror. There is no imminent prospect of them ceasing. Why does this achieve 12 out of 12? Well, note how specific I am in the very first sentence. I immediately answer the question about the narrator's feelings and give a very detailed point that he feels trapped, fraught, and claustrophobic. Next up, of course, is the carefully chosen quotation, ideally containing imagery and deliciously precisely introduced by he writes : Note also the use of ellipsis so that I don't copy out more words than necessary. This allows me to skip to another phrase that I will subsequently probe in detail. Subject terminology is used accurately, and no, it doesn't need to be complicated, whilst I also segue from exploring language into making a point about the structure. Helpful, of course, when the mark scheme requires the analysis of both language and structure to be consistent and detailed. With this in mind, it's always a good idea to kick off at least one paragraph with structurally, as I do here. Note also that it's worth quoting when exploring structure. Previously, I segued from exploring language into exploring structure. Here, I do vice versa and explore the effects of the wider reference to God. One final point is about vocabulary. Of course, this question doesn't explicitly test your range of vocabulary, but it sure as hell helps to have a wide vocabulary if you want to make sure that your points sound as intelligent and are as specific as possible. What should you do? If you are keen to expand your vocabulary, as I'm sure you are, dear viewers, subscribers, and especially pupils, yes, you've got it, read. Particularly perhaps current affairs magazines and broadsheet newspapers. Time now for you to make a judgment call on your response. How does it compare to mine? Have you written the same sort of quantity, i.e. 2 full sides of A4? Are there any moments where, on reflection, your analysis is a little wishy-washy? Do you have any of the dreaded limp, non-point scoring statements about the writer using language and structure to great effect, as opposed to actually naming the language or structure and what the effect is? Press pause to ponder and mark. Question 4 is quite tricky.
You Probe the statement for question 4. Need to weigh it up to get a lovely score. Compare the text frequently. Compare the text frequently and back up your points with an embedded quote.
The quality of your weighing up and your use of backed up quotations gets you up to 12 marks in this question. Press pause now to read some suggested initial evaluative points for text 1. And here are some possible evaluative ideas for text 2. But of course, you also need detailed interwoven comparisons throughout to get 6 marks. So when you evaluate, you also want to pit the text against each other and decide which text is more powerful, as I do in my model response.
Time for my model response to question 4.
Both of these Gothic texts create an atmosphere of suspense, although these are more explicit in text 1 due to the unsettling setting of the castle and the presence of the supernatural. However, there is an argument that the suspense is more powerful in text 2, in which the abrupt appearance of a young woman seems strange and otherworldly. In text 1, suspense is built up by the melodramatic warning issued by the Count at the very beginning of the passage. He alerts the narrator, "Be warned not to sleep in other parts of the castle, but if you be not careful in this respect." The incomplete sentence and the urgency of the imperative be leaves unanswered questions for the narrator and the reader about what kind of dangers may be lurking within the castle, and thus effectively builds up suspense, partly because these are not specified. In contrast, there are no warnings about dangers in text 2, but suspense is built up by early descriptions of shock as the narrator is touched by a young lady. However, the identity of the person is not revealed until the 3rd paragraph, with instead the narrator making reference to the touch of a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder, which makes him tense his own fingers around the handle of his stick. The fact that the reader has to wait 2 paragraphs until the identity of the strange late-night toucher is revealed builds up suspense more subtly and arguably more powerfully than the explicit warning in text 2. That said, it is notable that the young lady in text 2 has nothing wild, nothing immodest in her manner, and that she seemed quiet and self-controlled. However, although some aspects of her character do not seem alarming, it is the fact that she is out alone in the high road an hour after midnight which unsettles and builds up suspense. She certainly seems far more normal and commonplace than the Count in text 1, who is seen emerging from a window before crawling down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. Such a description certainly builds up a feeling of horror, as it suggests the Count may have disturbing animalistic qualities which could enable him to commit acts of evil beyond a normal human being. However, some readers may view the idea of vertical wall crawling as overly melodramatic and instead find the combination of apparent normality puzzlingly present on a deserted late-night heath more unsettling. Indeed, a closer inspection of text 2 indicates that there are some slightly strange aspects to the solitary woman. Firstly, the fact that she is dressed from head to foot in white garments is likely to give her a peculiar ghostly appearance. Secondly, her voice had something curiously still and mechanical in its tones, with a remarkably rapid utterance. Particularly within a 19th century context, one might expect a solitary woman lost late at night to seem scared, or to express some emotions. But this is emphatically not the case here, as she asks her questions to the narrator without the least fretfulness or impatience. This seems incongruous and builds up suspense as both the reader and narrator continue to wonder what this woman is doing in this deserted place at such a time. In a similar way, the narrator in text 1 has numerous unanswered questions after watching the Count crawl down the castle walls. He wonders, what manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it in the semblance of man? He is now horrified at his realization that the Count is not a human being, but may be using an apparently human appearance to mask non-human malignity. This certainly builds up suspense, in that it is clear that the narrator's life may be at risk, which is not the case in text 2. However, this suspense is far less relatable than the superficially more normal events of text 1. Very few of us have spent nights in a castle, and none of us have seen a human-looking creature crawl down a wall, whereas all of us can picture a late-night setting with a strange, lone, lost woman. Therefore, to my mind, text 2 more powerfully builds up an atmosphere of suspense in comparison to the obviously gothic silliness of text 1. Let's briefly probe this response. Well, an introduction is helpful, as you can quickly show the examiner that you've understood the key events of both texts in relation to the statements. I like the idea of beginning to suggest whether one text may be more powerful than the other in relation to the statements. Note the overall general structure of each paragraph. First, a topic sentence probing the statements. Then a carefully chosen embedded quotation backing up the points. Then the evaluation, referencing ideas / language from the quotation. That is enough on one single text, so you then need to shift and make a comparative point about the second text, which probes the statement. This needs to be backed up with an embedded quotation before the paragraph ends with further comparative evaluation. In my first main paragraph, I kick off by making a point about text 1 in relation to the statement. It's always a good idea to use words from the statement, as I do here when I reference the word suspense. Note the slightly more sophisticated embedding of quotations in my second sentence. I have the first one, be warned, within dashes, and the second post-colon. More difficult to do, yes, but it shows the examiner that I'm in control both of my sentence structures and my analysis. Note the use of subject terminology in the third sentence. Now, this is not actually needed, so it's important not to get confused between the requirements of question 3 and question 4. For question 3, you must have subject terminology and you must probe the meaning and effect of language and structure. For question 4, we're looking for the quality of your evaluation. Sometimes using subject terminology can mean that your evaluation is even more precise and insightful. And here it is, as I point out that the incomplete sentence and the urgency of the imperative be leaves unanswered questions for the narrator and the reader about what kind of dangers may be lurking within the castle, and thus effectively builds up suspense. It's important not to spend too much time on one text and to make a specific comparison, which I do here when I point out there are no warnings about dangers in text 2. Following some point making about the suspense in text 2, backed up with an embedded quotation and some evaluation, I conclude the paragraph with some comparative evaluation. Arguably, the delay to the revelation about the identity of the strange late-night toucher builds up suspense more subtly and arguably more powerfully than the explicit warning in text 2. Hopefully, you are now in a better position to give yourself marks out of 12 for evaluation, focus on question and use of supporting quotations, and 6 for comparisons. Press pause to do this. Now for section B. The key here is to write beautifully accurately and to make sure that you structure for effect, you build up to something. I also always say to my pupils, how can you expect to write a beautiful piece of fiction if you never read any fiction? The mark scheme is split into two sections, 24 marks for tone, sounding right, and a carefully planned, ideally clever structure. 16 marks is essentially for spag, spelling, punctuation and grammar. You are looking to use a wide variety of sentence structures for effects and a wide range of accurate punctuation, including, of course, the much maligned semicolon.
Time for my model answer to question 6.
The excitement was coursing through my bulging veins. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. Following a wretched time at work, caused by smug, ignorant, incompetent managers, a fog of panic attack misery was beginning to clear, and my heart looked like it might be ready to sing again. For, after a great deal of hassle, an extraordinary amount of planning, and a preposterous quantity of money exchanging hands, my wife and I would finally get the chance to participate in one of the world's most desirable tourist experiences, an exclusive tour of Real Madrid's Bernabeu Stadium. A la Madrid! The morning started so well. According to the notoriously reliable Google Maps, our boutique hotel was a mere 20 minutes walk from the stadium. Hooray! En route, we found a surprisingly affordable cafe where we tucked into cappuccinos with an extra shot of espresso, miniature chocolate croissants, and a decadent tarta de Santiago, a rich almond cake perfect for anyone who may be suffering the after effects of Mexican cocktails from the previous night. The winter sun was shining, the sky was blue. A la Madrid. The stadium itself soared up majestically amongst a surprisingly built-up landscape of traditional Spanish restaurants, international hotels, and glass skyscrapers. At ground level, 2 coaches pulled into a parking area and discharged tens of excited, chatting Japanese tourists, many sporting white and black scarves. Close to the entrance, there was even a Bellingham bear with lovable furry legs and oh-so-cute glassy eyes. Fancy a picture? No problem. Just tap the card machine with €10 and snap away. We had previously been warned that the stadium tour would be slightly different due to long-term building works aimed at ensuring the best club in the world has the best stadium in the world. However, after walking up a number of flights of metallic stairs, excitement rose as we were ushered firmly towards the viewing area, a small cordoned-off part of the stadium overlooking the pitch. Except it wasn't there. Rather than an ocean of glimmering green bays, we are presented with a concrete building site. Rather than goalposts, a digger. Rather than evocative memories of past glories, the distant sound of drilling and machinery. A la Madrid, I tried to cry as I stood there, having finally arrived at the home of greats such as Zidane, Figo and Beckham. However, with so many others behind me, there wasn't time, and so I was propelled out of the viewing area in order to take my place in the queue to be photographed with the Champions League trophy. It must have been the real one, mustn't it? There was no compulsion to buy, but if I wanted a keyring capturing this memorable moment, it would be mine for just €25. Even more fortuitously, there was an opportunity to have a photograph with your favourite player. You could choose from heroes such as Roberto Carlos, Raul, and the Brazilian Ronaldo. The wonders of modern technology, the genius of marketing legends, and a snip at just €20. After being ushered round a museum full of large photographs and endless trophies, the tour ended, most conveniently I might add, in the stadium shop. I couldn't resist purchasing a genuine Real Madrid shirt for €175. Official product, the label inside pronounces proudly. A la Madrid. Opening paragraphs are particularly important, of course, and you need to show off immediately how well you can write. A few things to pick out. Precise and subtle vocabulary in the use of the verb coursing, meaning, of course, flowing quickly or in large amounts. Note the use of onomatopoeia to mimic the sounds of an excited heartbeat, separated by a slightly longer pause with the semicolons. Try to vary your use of punctuation as much as possible, especially in this opening paragraph, to show the examiner that you can do it. What about this use of imagery as I reference a fog of panic attack misery beginning belatedly to clear? This is clearly more sophisticated than just blurting out, "I've been feeling bloody miserable." I do think it is a good idea to litter your creative writing with literary devices such as a simile, personification, metaphor, and note here the use of tricolon, which allows me to build up to the revelation about my exciting tourist trip to the Bernabeu. I'm a big fan of having at least one short paragraph for effects. I actually repeat the same one 3 times, but omit the exclamation mark for the final one to indicate how my enthusiasm has been dimmed by the exposure to the relentless commercialism within the stadium tour and shop. Remember also the importance of referencing plenty of details within your Paper 2 Section B response. We want to be able to picture where you are and picture your hopes and dreams being steadily crushed. Now compare to your response and scrutinise this mark scheme in more detail. Give yourself a mark out of 24 and a second mark out of 16. The second part of the mark scheme will appear in 5 seconds time.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, providing you with a brand new Paper 2 for GCSE OCR English Language. I hope it's been useful. Many thanks for watching.